A humble rancher's quiet gesture of mercy drew 1,000 Apaches to his doorstep at first light. Elias Warren had passed most of his days convinced the world was a harsh spot where a fellow got by staying low and keeping his spirit shielded. But all that shifted on the morning he stumbled upon the injured Apache lad by the parched stream bed behind his modest spread. Elias was a struggling rancher, scarcely clinging to the handful of steers that remained. Yet some inner voice wouldn't let him turn away. From the youngster sprawled there, an arrow piercing his shoulder. The boy's breaths came ragged, his features smeared with grit, but those eyes, they still burned with the spark of someone battling to endure. Elias hoisted him up with care, fully aware that sheltering an Apache might invite peril, especially amid the brewing strife between homesteaders and the tribes. Even so, the way the boy gripped his cuff, it sealed the choice. He bore the child into his rough-hewn cabin, settled him on his own pallet, and devoted the afternoon to mending the injury, flushing it with the scant remedies on hand. The lad stayed silent at first, wincing only when Elias probed the shaft sentry, but in time he murmured his name, Kota. Elias gave a soft nod and promised the boy he'd pull through, if he just held on. He trusted that spark. Kota's terror eased into weariness, and he dozed as Elias stood vigil through the dark hours, unsure if sunrise would usher calm or calamity. Come morning, Elias stirred to a faint shuffle and spotted Kota propped up, fumbling for a cup of water. He watched him for a moment, then eased the vessel to his lips and helped him sip, before wrestling up a plain breakfast. The boy tracked each motion with wary interest. When Elias offered the dish, Kota paused, then took it with a subtle incline of his head. For the first time, Elias caught a glimmer of thanks in those young eyes, something that touched him deeper than any coin or prize ever might. As the day wore on, Kota began to unwind, and by dusk, he shared bits of his tale. His foraging band had been set upon by a band of rogue bandits who stalked both pioneers and natives alike. Kota had broken free, but hadn't gotten far before the bleeding felled him. Elias heard him out, mindful that if those marauders lingered close, danger loomed for everyone, tribesman or settler. He hitched his mount, latched the cabin door twice over, and remained vigilant. Kota slumbered once more, his respiration steadier, his frame starting to mend. 3 days on, the expanse around the ranch transformed in ways Elias could scarcely fathom. He stepped out for a bucket of water when the earth quivered ever so slightly beneath his boots. He paused, puzzled. Then, there they were. Shadows at first, then figures, gliding over the skyline. Scores of Apache horsemen, their outlines unfurling over the grasslands in a steady stream. Elias's breath hitched. He'd grown up on tales of Apache fighters, dauntless, devoted, unyielding when safeguarding their kin. But beholding them in such a throng, advancing as one with intent, it set his heart racing. They drew near without a whisper, rank upon rank encircling the homestead, until the very soil seemed to bow under their weight. Elias resisted the urge to grab his rifle. He knew that spell his end. Instead, he advanced, hands bared, trusting his deeds' plain honesty would plead his case. The riders divided, and an elder fighter with thick plates and a grave demeanor swung down from his saddle. His gaze was keen, bearing the command of one who led. Kota, sire. Before Elias could utter a word, the cabin door groaned ajar behind him, and Kota hobbled forth, steadying himself on the jamb. The boy uttered a lone Apache phrase, his tone quivering yet firm. The chief pivoted toward Elias unhurriedly, and the heft of that stare, it weighed Elias's every choice like a scale. After a drawn silence, Kota's father dipped his chin in a single bow. So unexpected, Elias almost reeled. The horsemen loosened their holds on their arms, and the strain melted into a peace that bordered on dreamlike. Kota made his way back to his father's steed, aided by a pair of riders. But ere they departed, the Apache chief closed the gap to Elias, unclasped a strung necklace from his throat, and laid it softly in the rancher's grasp. Elias grasped not its import, but he felt its profound weight. The column then wheeled as a body and melted into the far reaches, their retreat as shut as the event. Elias let out a tremulous sigh, blind to how this encounter marked merely the dawn of far grander tides. That twilight, Elias hunkered by his modest blaze, gazing at the beads and sifting through the day's echoes in his thoughts. He pondered if he'd cross paths with Kota anew. As slumber claimed him at last, he pictured the lad rejoining his folk unscathed. But neither Elias nor the folk in the neighboring hamlets could have foreseen the tide ahead. For while Elias figured the Apaches had withdrawn from sheer thanks, Kota's father had ridden off with a solemn pledge. And that oath would summon a whole Apache kin to the rancher's unassuming patch in a manner unmatched across the frontier. Elias aroused 3 dawns hence to a rumble that seized his chest, the far-off drum of hooves, deeper and more thunderous than prior. A clamor so immense it swallowed the dawn's hush. He bolted outdoors, bracing for a patrol perhaps, or some stray troop of travelers, but the sight that greeted him rooted him in place. Spanning the meadows from rim to rim, horsemen surged forth in multitudes beyond reckoning. This was no mere cluster, no mere hunt's assembly. It was a full host. Braves, headmen, sages, and fledglings arrayed in order, with standards, rhythms, and a harmony that pulsed on the breeze. Elias sensed the scale of it all, yet fathomed not their return's cause. He'd offered no feat to warrant this return. The vanguard reined up a dozen paces from his stoop, the turf thrumming under their mounts. Then they cleaved, carving a corridor through their midst. Kota's father emerged once more, clad in ritual garb laced with plumes, etched bones, and emblems. Elias comprehended little, but honored it on instinct. Kota flanked him, perched upright, his hurt swathed afresh, yet on the mend. The boy raised his palm to Elias, his countenance alight with knowing. Kota's father, alight, neared Elias measuredly and rested a palm on the rancher's arm. In a motion richer than speech, he conveyed through an interpreter who advanced from the lines. The voice relayed that Kota's sire, hailed by his own as Chief Nayati, had convened a gathering and recounted Elias's mercy. Though destitute, though unbound by duty to aid, though courting peril to his claim, Elias had preserved a youth from another realm. To Nayati's band, such grace bore vast esteem. They held that rescuing one soul forged ties twixt clans, peoples, and lineages. Kota's spirit was cherished. His loss would have sundered their weave. In sparing him, Elias had bared a soul deserving profound regard. Ere Elias could muster a reply, the ranks about him slid from their saddles, in a fluid sweep that rippled the plain like surf. No menace here, a mark of homage. Elias held fast, awestruck. As the interpreter pressed on, the chief and his folk had mustered at break of day to balance the ledger of life with safeguard, aid, and pact. They tendered what frontiersmen seldom knew: faith. Kota advanced, bearing a finer necklace than the prior gift. He draped it around Elias's neck with his own hands, a token naming him ward and comrade to the clan. Elias strove to voice that he merited no such tribute, but feeling knotted his words. The Apaches arrived not barren-handed. They bore provisions, bison haunch, preserved berries, woven panniers, and implements. They gifted steeds, sturdy and schooled, largesse seldom bestowed on strangers. They shored his stockade, buttressed his outbuilding, and patched his dwelling's flaws. Young ones trailed Kota round the yard, giggling as he beamed and pointed to his haven of recovery. Matrons cooked feasts and piled split logs by the threshold. Sentries patrolled the bounds, warding bandits or foes from the grounds. Elias wandered among them, dazed, sensing the isolation he'd nursed for seasons ebb into a warmth long faded. Kinship. Through the hours, Kota lingered near, chatting via nods, grins, and nascent English phrases. Elias saw the boy's keen wit and forthright bent. When Kota demonstrated tracing signs in the soil, Elias heeded with admiration for the lad's keen senses. When Kota's father beheld him, a tenderness in his look let Elias glimpse the rarity of their tie. Later, the interpreter confided that Chief Nayati had mourned kin lost to settlers' coldness afore. To encounter its reverse, it had mended a fracture in him. As dusk draped the far bluffs, Chief Nayati summoned his company for a subdued rite, drawing Elias to his flank. A ring took shape, and beats resounded o'er the fields. The observance rang not with clamor or fury. It breathed reverence, laced with thanks for Kota's reprieve and honor for his rescuer. Elias stood abashed, wordless. For the first span in ages, he knew his days held purpose beyond herding beasts and weathering want. As the rite closed, Nayati imparted via the go-between. A fellow's fortune tallies not in herds or ore, but in his spirit's fortitude. This day you stand not solitary, you claim 1,000 steadfast kin. The host readied to withdraw, yet not in haste, a trickle over the ensuing pair of sons, bequeathing traces of their sojourn, bolstered rails, incised wards on the gateposts, and durables to endure. Kota tarried to the last, clasping Elias fierce, ere galloping off with his sire. Elias lingered long after their forms blurred from view. The acres hushed anew, but his soul brimmed fuller than in years untold. He'd scraped as a penniless herder his whole span, yet his compassion had summoned what no trove could claim, esteem, ties, and a league mighty enough to summon 1,000 Apaches to his threshold at dawn.